and it can be an opportunity for you to kind of learn the basics of really good whole foods.
We'll go ahead and get started today. We're going to be talking about how to lose fat and keep it off. And we specifically put fat in the title and not weight because, weight is a very misleading number. And so today what we are specifically going to be talking about is not only how to lose fat, but why do we store fat? And what does that mean? What is that a symptom of in the body? And so if anybody was not convinced before, I have a little bit of data to show you. And some of you might have seen some of this before, but this is just a little bit of information about the obesity epidemic that we have here in the United States. So this is a picture that shows, this was put out by the CDC in 1990, and this is showing the body mass index according to different states. And so what you'll see is most of the states have less than a 10% percentage of their population with a BMI less than 30, because at 30 or over 30, that is the definition of obesity. And so most of the states are either less than 10% or they're 10 to 14%. So this is 1990, so about 30 years ago. So when you go 1995, 5 years later, look how much the map has changed. Now we have no states that are less than 10%, and now all the states are falling in either the 10 to 14%, and a lot of the states have actually jumped up to 15 to 19%. So up to a fifth of the population is defined as being obese. You jump ahead to 2000. 2000, we see another significant change. Now Colorado is kind of the lone state that's hanging on at the 10 to 14%. Half the states are at the 15 to 19, and now half the states are up to 20 to 24%. 2005, another big shift. And you know what? I think what's so dramatic about this is the short time period in which this is happening. These are 5-year differences, and we're seeing, percentages jump up by 5 to 10% of the population, as being obese in certain states. Some of the worst states on this map in 2005 are now in a new color category. They're above 30%. So this is 2005. Look, 2010, now we have a whole lot more states joining the ranks of that above 30% number. And then this is the most recent one I could find, 2014. They've again added another color category on here for a few states where more than 35% of the population is classified as obese. So this is a big issue. This is a big issue in our country, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why this has become such a big issue. But one thing that was a big change was during the 80s. The American Heart Association came out with this idea that fat is bad. You need to decrease fat for cardiovascular reasons. Fat makes you fat. And what basically the low-fat movement equated to was a high sugar replacement, for those fats in those foods. And so during this time, what was adopted was this idea of a calorie in, calorie out model. So maybe, Dr. Ron, can you explain a little bit about what the calorie in, calorie out model is and why it doesn't work?
Well, from a physics point of view, a calorie is a calorie. And so it didn't matter whether it was sugar or whether it was whole grains or whether it was just vegetables. If you ate more than a certain amount of calories, then your body would have to store that excess calories unless you exercised more in order to compensate for that particular problem. And so from a physics perspective, it works. I mean, if you're in a kind of, you can put people in a calorimeter and you can measure calories and all that, and it kind of made sense from a physics perspective. But from the metabolic sense, if we look at how metabolism works, it turns out that a calorie is not a calorie, and that what you eat is more important than how much you eat.
That's true. And, a great representation of this was an article that was put out by the New York Times in 2016, where they went back and looked at contestants who had participated in the show The Biggest Loser. That show is notorious for taking people who are severely obese, putting them through an exercise, a real fanatical exercise regime and caloric restriction for a period of time. And, in the extreme, these people lost weight and they were very successful at losing weight. But what this article explored was they went back and looked at all the contestants years later, and what they found was the majority of the contestants gained the weight back. But what was so shocking about them gaining the weight back was not that they had fallen victim to their old habits and they were overeating and not exercising. In fact, these people were exercising 2+ hours a day and limiting their calories, to less than 1,200 calories a day, and yet they were still gaining weight. So in a sense, that severe sort of restriction to their biochemistry, their body fought back, against that, and it was harder and harder for them to maintain their weight, even though they were still doing that calorie in, calorie out model and trying to restrict the number of calories in and burn more calories, to try and bring down that number, and it didn't work. And so, so this is a great little kind of micro study at looking at why that model is not a great one. And this is an example of what most of us look like when we're under that sort of a model. We get, we get upset, we get hangry, or this, I found this also. This is what, dieting looks like, for a lot of people who try and severely restrict the number of calories they're eating.
There's a more insidious component to the title, The Biggest Loser. It also, I don't know whether you catch it, but it also implies that people who can't control their weight are big losers. And so there's a very horrible kind of moral judgment or a bias in our society against people who have trouble controlling their weight. And that came about from this calorie in, calorie out kind of physics that, well, you're just eating too much. That's the whole problem. You don't have any willpower. You're not taking good care of yourself. All you have to do is eat less and exercise more. Unfortunately, that doesn't work because it doesn't take into consideration this very fundamental concept of metabolism. Because when people do employ these extreme techniques, and a lot of the dieting techniques, same thing happens, you can lose weight, but you're slowing down your metabolism and you're changing the way your body handles those calories. And so part of what we're going to be talking about today is a whole revolution in our understanding of how metabolism works and what we need to do to get our cells working better to more efficiently burn the calories and not have to worry about every time we eat a little extra of this or a little extra of that we're not going to just suddenly bulge out another 5 pounds the next day.
Right, and so it kind of brings us to the question of why do we gain fat? What is the purpose of that? Why is our body putting on excess fat? And fat storage is just that. Your body is storing fuel. Fat is a really great fuel source for the body, and it's great because we carry that fuel source around with us all the time. And so, especially for our ancestors that didn't have a continuous access to calories, it was great to have this backup mechanism to where if they didn't have access to food, their body could transition and start burning this built-in fuel storage, and you're not burning muscle. You need muscle to get more food. So you're burning something that is just kind of stored as excess in the body. And so when people start to gain a lot of weight, and they're still hungry all the time, that's kind of a sign that hormones are being disrupted. And two big hormones when it comes to diet and appetite are two called leptin and ghrelin. Has everybody heard those hormones before? Ghrelin, you can remember ghrelin kind of like your stomach growling, because ghrelin is the hormone that when you eat something and it gets to your stomach and you get enough of it, ghrelin signals your brain that, hey, I'm full. I don't need anything else to eat. And so this is a real important immediate feedback mechanism to tell you when your body has enough. Now, to go back to Dr. Ron's point where he was talking about it's less important to measure quantity and more important to look at quality, because there are certain food types that we're eating that don't trigger ghrelin to work. A big category is foods that are high in sugar, specifically the sugar fructose. Fructose does not stimulate ghrelin in the stomach. So you could have, a 48-ounce soda that's got, 2,000 to 3,000 calories in it, and that's not going to stimulate any sort of fullness in the body. In fact, you'll probably get to the end of that, and an hour later, your stomach's going to start growling and say that you're hungry. But if you had tried to sit down and eat, say 2,000 to 3,000 calories of vegetables, or even 2,000 to 3,000 calories of a steak, of something that has some sort of substance, you would very quickly feel very full. And so, so part of the quality of our diet, foods like sugar, foods that are simple carbs, basically anything that comes in a box, so your boxed cereals, your boxed crackers, your bagged chips, all of those foods, don't stimulate that hormone. And this is actually an advantage to the food companies because, if that hormone isn't triggered, what are you going to do? You're going to eat more, exactly, which is their whole goal.
One thing as we're going through this conversation to kind of keep in mind is that the genes that all of us have, we've inherited them from our ancestors from thousands and thousands of years ago. And nowadays, the whole survival issue is not what it was back then. Back then, foraging for food was a very important part of survival. And many people are saying that the human species has probably the greatest capability of surviving of starvation of any other species because we had to. Since we had to go chase the food or hunt the food, more often we had to gather it or forage it. We didn't have a refrigerator when we walked out of the cave. We had to run or we had to look for a long time to find that food. So we are geared to store calories. And when we put ourselves into a starvation state, or if we do certain types of diets or eat certain types of foods that do not properly trigger the leptin and ghrelin, then we're going to basically be feeding that tendency to want to save and store, save and store, save and store. So really, obesity is our survival genes gone haywire in the modern food environment in which we live. For example, one example of that is fruits. It used to be that fruits were really only available, even as much as 50 or 60 years ago, fruits were only available at the late part of the summer, during the fall, when the orchards, when the fruits ripened. Then you would have fruit once a year, and you couldn't preserve it very well. Now we have these wonderfully looking fruits year-round, and fruits are high in fructose. And fructose is very different than just sugar. Sucrose is actually a blend of glucose and fructose, but it is stored as fat in the liver as much as the liver can store it. Then if the liver can't store it, it gets stored other places in the body. It's an overflow phenomenon to where the liver can't keep up with the storage, and so it starts putting it into the viscera. The people that have the pot belly actually have overflow of fat storage into the viscera, and then from there it can flow to other places in the body as well.
We were actually talking about this, I think it was this morning, and my dad had a great analogy for us as humans that we're kind of like a hybrid car. A hybrid car, if you run the battery, in a hybrid car, that's a self-charging mechanism. It's a great, very energy efficient source of energy. But if you want to speed up really fast, or if you want to go at high speeds, you're better off burning gas because gas is going to make that car go faster. You're not going to get any great, get up and go from the battery. Well, maybe in a Tesla, but most hybrids, you're not going to get, a lot of, get up and go from the battery. And that's how we are as humans because we really have two engines to burn fuel. We can burn sugar as a fuel, which is like in the hybrid burning gas, but we can also burn fat as fuel. But much like the hybrid, we don't use both fuels at the same time. And in fact, there are certain rules that if we get sugar, our body's going to burn that first. It's going to use that engine because sugar gives us, like I said, that quick energy. And for our ancestors, quick energy was a huge, evolutionary advantage for them. But if you deplete the body of sugar, what the body naturally does is it shifts over to that other engine, kind of like the hybrid, and it starts burning fat for fuel. Now, the huge advantage of burning fat is that's how we store our energy in the body. So if for instance, you are in your fat burning engine and you run out of fat in the diet, naturally, without a drop in your blood sugar, without feeling hungry, your body's going to naturally start burning stored fat. And so that's a real kind of seamless, transition. And that's a huge advantage to us because, especially for us in our modern world, when you seamlessly transition into burning stored fat, that's how we stay lean. And so in our world today, most people, because we have this constant source of sugar and carbs, we wake up and we have oatmeal for breakfast, or we have our Starbucks drink, or we have Dunkin' Donuts. So immediately we're feeding our body sugar. And then we go through McDonald's drive-thru for lunch and we get more fries and more soda and more carbs. So it's like all day long we're feeding this sugar engine. And rather than burning our stored fuel for energy, we're actually adding more fat to our body because our body can't burn all that sugar because we're not exercising. And so, like Dr. Ron said, our liver ends up storing a lot of that sugar as fat. And so we end up gaining more fat and more fat. We suppress those hormones, so we feel more hungry, and we're eating foods that don't have nutrients, and so we feel less satisfied, and the cycle continues. And so
let's talk about insulin, because really we cannot escape this discussion at all without all of you walking out of this room with a better understanding of insulin. So all of you know that there's two types. They're now saying there's three types of diabetes. There's the type 1, where the child develops, it's an autoimmune disease. Their pancreatic cells that make insulin get destroyed in an autoimmune way, and they become insulin deficient.
This is what it looks like. This picture here on the left, that emaciated.
Which you don't see hardly anymore. This was before insulin was put into general use in medicine. It was a huge discovery of insulin. And it was actually porcine, pig-based insulin, and now we have the one that's made genetically that's perfect. And it was a huge because it prevented these kids from dying in many cases. But notice that this is the same girl, and the girl on the left is after she's gotten insulin. So without insulin, this is what you look like on the right, and with insulin, your body's able to process sugar, and you do not go into the ketoacidosis, which can actually kill you.
Without insulin, your body can't use sugar, and when you can't use sugar, you lose a lot of weight. All your cells can't burn it for energy.
Now compare that to type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is where we say that is insulin resistance. How many of you have heard the term insulin resistance? That's what we want to talk about today, because we're going to kind of give you a different way of looking at insulin resistance. So with insulin resistance, the old model of insulin resistance is somehow the lock and key is broke. Insulin is the key, and the receptor on your cell is where the insulin goes in, and it opens up the cell so it can take in the glucose, and now you're fine. And if you get type 2 diabetes, something goes wrong with that lock and key, and you can't take the glucose in, and so now you have really high blood sugar because your body's not using the insulin correctly. Well, what's wrong with that model? I mean, if it truly was that the glucose could not get in, wouldn't we start looking like that type 1 diabetic? Because she couldn't get glucose into her cells, and she looked emaciated. And when they gave her the insulin, then she looked fine. But here, isn't this the typical type 2 diabetic? They've gained a lot of extra weight. There's a bunch of other things that happens with insulin resistance. Your lipids gets kind of crazy, your body fat, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, your blood sugar, your blood pressure goes up. There's a number of consequences of type 2 diabetes, and if you let it go on and on, pretty soon you can no longer, your pancreas can no longer make enough insulin, and so the doctors start giving you more insulin. You start getting insulin shots, and now there's a number of new drugs out that simulate insulin enhancement. And so the idea in medicine was we were still stuck on the notion that diabetes is an insulin deficiency problem. Guess what? That may not be the case anymore. And this may be the reason why, as a field of medicine, we've been treating diabetes the wrong way and not getting the results that we really need to get.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what is the correct model? Talk a little bit about the spillover effect of insulin. So what's if we can't get glucose, or if there's too much insulin, what's happening at the cellular level?
So really we need to talk a little bit about what insulin does. So insulin helps the body to store glycogen. Is that let's get my neck, is the one up? Yeah. So what insulin does is that it helps get glucose converted into glycogen in the liver and in our muscles. And so, of course, the reason we need it in our muscles is to get away from the saber-toothed tiger, right? If we're being chased by the saber-toothed tiger, we need a burst of energy. Or if your blood sugar is low, you eat something sweet to get that burst. Or if your brain's getting a little foggy, you take something sweet in order to get the glucose. Or if you haven't eaten anything, your liver can put out a little extra glycogen. So glycogen is our storage battery. It's quick energy available to us that's stored. But we can only store about 2,000 calories worth of glycogen. And then what happens? Then what happens is the liver starts converting the glycogen into fat. And you start actually, if you let that go and go and go, you start getting a fatty liver. Especially with fructose. The number one liver disease in the United States today is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we're seeing in kids who are drinking a lot of these giant fructose drinks, because fructose especially gets stored in the liver. And then when the liver is filled to the brim, then it starts going out to the visceral fat, and then it can go out to other parts of the body as well. But the problem is not that we're not getting glucose in, it's just that we filled up the storage battery. We filled it up because we're consuming the wrong kinds of calories. And what is the type of calorie that generates insulin? What calorie do you eat that generates the most insulin? Sugar or carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are nothing other, like if you take bread or pasta, they're just basically chains of glucose. That's what glycogen is. That's what your basic starches are just chains of glucose. So whether we take sugar out of the sugar bowl or we eat a bunch of bread or white starch or donuts or cookies, things like that, the sugar is what is converted into glucose, and it stimulates the production of insulin. And it's not that the insulin isn't working anymore, it's just that the storage chamber becomes full. And so there's an overflow phenomenon occurring. And that overflow is going into fat storage. Another really big problem with insulin is when your insulin is high, and it tends to be high after you've had a high carbohydrate meal, you cannot break down fat. So when you're going around with high levels of insulin, matter of fact, nowadays when I check people for type 2 diabetes, I'm not only interested in their fasting blood sugar, I want to know what their fasting insulin is. Because if your fasting insulin is going up, that tells us that you're becoming more insulin resistant. And the cause of insulin resistance is too much insulin. And then when you start getting into, well, what's the cause of too much insulin? Most of the time, it's too much carbohydrate. And the reason it's too much carbohydrate is because since about the 1960s or so, when we made fat and cholesterol the bad guys, then the snack wells came in, and then all the sugars came in to substitute for the fat, because food didn't taste good without fat. And so the food companies started putting more sugar in. And so we as a nation became very addicted to high levels of carbohydrate in our diet. And it is very addictive because once you have high insulin levels, you cannot release fat very well. You cannot, the hybrid engine does not shift from the storage to the gas. And so the only thing you can do is eat more sugar. It's when you start to feel low. And I remember giving lectures on this 20, 30 years ago, how a lot of people live in this kind of roller coaster ride where they start out the day with a high carbohydrate breakfast. They peak their glucose, their insulin, which is partially resistant, finally peaks, and then their blood sugar drops. And then when they have low blood sugar, they really feel like, I got to get something, I got to have a pop, I got to have coffee with sugar, I've got to have a donut. So that's why the mid-morning snack became important. And even my wife, who's a second grade teacher, the kids now they have to have breakfast, they have to have a mid-morning snack, they have to have lunch, they have an afternoon snack, they have an after-school snack, they have supper, and then they have a snack with their evening studies or TV or whatever they're doing in the evening. So we're kind of in this kind of roller coaster ride. And the net result is we're running around with very high insulin levels, and it's preventing us from getting to our fat stores.
Right. So this is a look at what Dr. Ron was saying, that some of the other effects of metabolic syndrome. So when your body is storing all this excess sugar as fat, not only does that affect your weight, but it also affects, like you said, your blood pressure, your lipids, your triglycerides increase, your cholesterol increases, your LDL, your VLDL cholesterol increases. You start getting inflammatory markers, that start increasing. It affects your lifestyle, because when you're on that roller coaster ride, people tend to have peaks and valleys of energy. And so you end up at the end of the day kind of being that person that was wired but then really tired at the same time. And if anybody's ever felt that way before, it's like you've got all this quick energy, but then that energy's gone. And then you get quick energy, and then that energy's gone. And that's that blood sugar, going up and down.
And I said there was 3 types of diabetes, type 1, type 2. Have you heard about type 3? This is where your brain actually starts to become insulin resistant. The brain really relies a lot on glucose. And when you develop that insulin resistance and the brain cells can't take in anymore, then you start getting your brain fog, your memory problems, your cognitive problems, and possibly down the road, the dementia and the Alzheimer's, which is now number 3 in the United States. And so this is once again, a long-term result. And this happens over years and years and decades and decades. That's why it's kind of hard to see it happen in us. We may every now and then get on the scale and see the weight coming on, or we may say, well, I'm forgetting this, or I'm tired now, or I'm not sleeping very well. And we don't realize that it's our habits over time creating something that I'm going to talk about here in just a minute, called a loss of metabolic flexibility. Because if you look at kids, they can eat sugar, but they can shift back to fat pretty fast. Whereas someone who is really deeply into insulin resistance, they've lost that ability to shift between the 2 hybrid engines. They pretty much get into sugar burning all the time. And they can't burn their fat, partly because their insulin level is running high. So insulin resistance, the thing that causes the actual problems that we're seeing with insulin resistance is insulin. So then we have to ask the question, what's causing us to have these high insulin levels? And we'll get to that. What can you do about it? Because that's the answer to the riddle.
I think most people in this room are over the age of 30. Everyone's kind of experienced that you eat, in your 20s a certain way, and then all of a sudden you hit your 30s and you can't eat that way anymore without there being some sort of, repercussion to that. And that's some of that metabolic flexibility. But we're going to get into here in a second strategies to hack this system, because there are a lot of things you can do to help shift your body more and more into that fat burning state. And, again, after the age of 30, you have to work a little bit harder at it than kids do, but it is possible to get your body into that state. And before we get to that, there's one thing I just want to go back real fast. We kind of skipped through this. This is a chart. You should have this printout in your packet. This is something, as we start talking about diet, when you're focusing on quality, not quantity, this is a great infographic to help you decide, what should I eat? What should I not eat? What should I eat lots of? What should I not eat, much of? And so this has a ton of information. This is from somebody named Dave Asprey. He does the Bulletproof Coffee. And so this is, I just thought this was a great infographic. So you have that in your sheet. And so that will probably answer some more specific questions as we start to go through diet.
Well, and if you don't if you're not carrying that around and you go out to eat and you're thinking, what should I eat that's going to be good for me and not trigger insulin, anything that is natural, whole, and real that's rich in colors, more often than not, is good for you. Now, that's not universally true, and there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, high-color foods, and this is why the government came out with the five-a-day plan, and I have a book that says we should maybe be eating 9 or 10 colors a day, because colors are low glycemic, they have low carbohydrate, they're rich in phytonutrients, they taste good, they're good for you. So this is the direction we want to move in, is real foods, whole foods.
Right. So that being said, diet is probably one of the most important things that you can work on when it comes to fat loss. And, I've heard the statistic up to 80% of how you look is what you eat. So you could be the best exerciser in the world. I can attest to this, marathon runner, and I had a hard time losing weight. So you can exercise, but if you're eating the wrong foods, physically you're going to store more fat and you're not going to be as lean, if you're making the wrong food choices. One piece of advice I always tell people is find what works for you. So everyone in here is going to be a little bit different, and so there isn't one size fits all for everybody.
There was a big recent study on that too, that there is no diet that fits everyone, and really you need to learn how to tune into what really works for you using some basic principles. But in my book, dieting is the wrong way to go. Dieting is the wrong way to go, but you have to think about your food choices. If you call diet making better food choices that fit you well, that's the way to go, and that's where they're finding people have the best success. Rather than trying to find a commercial diet, you learn what your body does the best with. And so inhabit your body, learn about yourself, and then you can get out of your dilemma that way.
That being said, though, give your body up to 2 months to adapt. So don't, do low carb for 2 days and say, well, I'm hungry all the time. This doesn't work for me. It does take your body a bit of a time, especially if you are in an insulin-resistant state and you have been using your sugar-burning engine for the past 20 years. You're going to have to, kind of like a muscle, you're going to have to train your body to start burning fat as fuel. And so give your body up to 2 months to adapt to, a different fuel type, before you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then create new habits. So one of the worst things people do when they, quote, go on a diet is they restrict everything. And when you restrict everything, eventually, you're going to run out of willpower and you're going to fall off the wagon. And so rather than trying to restrict anything, really I tell people for those first 2 months, don't restrict any calories, don't restrict anything except for the quality of food that you're eating. Focus on getting a good quality diet and eat as much of a good quality real foods diet as you want.
How many read the paper yesterday, Jane Brody's column? It was on the back of yesterday's Wichita paper. If you read it, that's exactly what she said. I was trying to lose weight. I couldn't lose it. I was 50 pounds over and nothing was working. I finally just I knew that I had to eat healthy, so all I tried to do was just eat healthy. And after a couple months of just eating really healthy, all of a sudden, she noticed that she was down 10 pounds. She hadn't even tried to lose weight. So a lot of it is kind of learning what healthy food is and then shifting towards that, and don't try to diet. Learn to follow your own inner rhythms and find what you like. And then we do have a secret weapon we're going to share with you at the end.
Yep. And then one little tip, too, is your body best utilizes carbs after 3 p.m. So one place to start, I tell people, is, try and do your breakfast and lunch as low carb as possible. If you have been in this insulin-resistant state, burning sugar for the past 20 years, your body's still going to want that sugar. And so rather than just going cold turkey saying, I'm not doing any carbs, ever again, give your body kind of the guidelines that you'll do low carb breakfast and lunch, because all of us should go into that fat burning state at one point during the day. And that's when we go to bed at night, because your body's going to burn through all of that stored glycogen that you kind of stored up throughout the day. And so by the time you're about halfway through the night, your body's going to switch over to burning fat. And so when you wake up in the morning, if you either do what we're going to talk about here in a second, where you fast, or you do low carb, high fat for breakfast and lunch, you're going to stay in that fat burning state through the morning and through mid-afternoon. And not only is that going to help balance and stabilize your blood sugar, but you're going to be burning fat during that time. And that's also a great time to exercise, because exercise is going to help you, burn excess fat. So if you need a guideline, after 3 p.m. is the best time to eat carbs. And I recommend, of course, good carbs like sweet potatoes and squash, and, don't binge on donuts. So, and then don't eat right before bed. This is another easy, again, even if you can't fathom doing low carb for breakfast and lunch, just try and not eat within 2 to 3 hours of going to bed, and see how you feel, and see how that affects your sleep, see how you feel in the morning when you wake up. And that's kind of a good first step. And then this is a big point. It seems real simplistic, but what you eat is what you crave. I've heard a number of people that say, I couldn't fathom giving up bread. I couldn't fathom giving up wheat. Well, if you're eating a lot of that, that's what your body's going to crave. But I can't tell you how many hundreds of patients that have shifted away from that start eating real food, that they come back a month or two later and they're like, you know what? I'm craving real food. Like, I crave Brussels sprouts. I crave broccoli now. I crave sweet potatoes. I crave coconut oil, so, and I've seen this true with kids also, all the parents that say, well, my kids won't eat vegetables. A lot of it is what you're giving them, because what you give them is what they're going to crave. And so you do have, like they said, that 2-month window where your body has to adapt to eating real food. But as soon as you adapt, I promise you will come back and you will say, lo and behold, I'm craving salads, crazy as it sounds.
This is not a new message. The Reardon Clinic, Dr. Don Davis used to lecture here all the time on whole foods, real foods. I think we all know it. It's just that we need to do it. But part of it is learning how to get out of the roller coaster ride, and learning how to re-energize your fat burning capabilities, because we can all burn sugar, and unfortunately sugar burning is where our cells are kind of regressing back into a more primitive style of functioning. Fat burning was when oxygen appeared on the earth, long time ago. Oxygen appeared, and then it was the beginning of the mitochondria. So energy is all about burning fat, and so you get more energy. It's a more efficient way to gain energy, and at the same time you'll start to use up the stored energy that you have, that you really don't need. None of us need to store. I suppose there's something bad could happen, but most of us don't have to deal with starvation at this time. And fasting, when we get to it, is not starvation. The difference between starvation and fasting is where some external force causes you to not get to eat, and it's like a punishment. Fasting, especially when you can look at it from many different ways. From the religious perspective, it's a cleansing. From the physiological perspective, it's a shifting, creating more metabolic flexibility. And from just a plain old everyday perspective, it's a mind clearing experience. That's once, for those of you that feel like you're hooked into the sugar burning part of your engine, once you start to fast, you'll learn that your mind really begins to wake up, and some of that brain fog that everyone complains of, or a lot of people complain to me about it, will start to go away, because burning fat is a much more even-keeled way to gain energy for your brain and your body.
Well, one important thing, we'll talk about fasting here in a second, is you can think about fasting kind of like running a marathon. If you haven't been training and haven't been running, you don't want to go out and just start with running a marathon. And so you do have, because you'll be miserable. You'll feel awful doing it. And so you do have to kind of flex that muscle of teaching your body to burn fat. And the more you do that, and the more you find that your blood sugar stabilizes during the day and you're not as hungry, that's a good time to start playing around with the fasting. And so, but to kind of finish up the conversation about diet, what dietary plans are best? And again, there isn't a good thing for any one person. The only reason I kind of wrote these down is I have a lot of patients that come in and they're like, I don't even know where to start. So if you're looking for recipes, these are some of the best recipes to search for. So Whole30 is a dietary, a way to eat where you're cutting out sugar, you're cutting out grains, you're cutting out dairy. And so there's a lot of really great Whole30 recipes out there that will put you, more into that eating real foods category. Paleo is very similar to the Whole30. Paleo has a few more of the natural sugars like honey and maple syrup in some of their recipes. So it's a little bit more flexible, but there's a lot of great paleo recipes out there. Ketogenic is a real big buzzword. right now, and the ketogenic diet is basically trying to get at least 60% of your calories in the day from fat. So it's a much higher fat. Now, the only thing you have to be careful of when you search for ketogenic is there are some people kind of like Atkins doing it wrong, where they're doing a lot of high fat, but it's high fat,
French fries.
French fries, no, not French fries, but like cream and, a lot of, not a lot of color and not a lot of vegetables. And so you want a ketogenic with lots of vegetables is the way to go. Low lectin is a diet that, that tends to be a little bit more restrictive, but it's great for people who have autoimmunity. So if you've got autoimmunity, a low lectin diet, there's a great book called The Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry that he talks a lot about a low lectin diet. Specific carbohydrate, I'll kind of skim through that's more again for people who have digestive issues. Same thing with the GAPS diet. Both of those are whole foods based diets though. And then my favorite, the JERF diet. Has anybody heard of the JERF diet? The Just Eat Real Food diet. That one's probably my favorite. It like Dr. Ren said, it doesn't have to be real complicated. Just shop the perimeter of a grocery store, eat real food and lots of vegetables. I actually think the food pyramid, one of the things they did wrong is they combined fruits and vegetables. So at least I know a lot of parents who think, oh, my kid got 5 servings of fruits today, they're good. But you really should, limit your fruits, almost put the fruits in the sugars category and try and get at least a serving or 2 of vegetables with every meal. I challenge people to do something green with every meal. And so, so these are just a few, like I said, if you're looking for recipes, these are a few great kind of recipe titles to search for if you're wanting to eat. Another one I guess I didn't put up here is low glycemic. A low glycemic diet is going to be, something that's going to be lower in sugar and carbs. All right, so now we're going to kind of jump into intermittent fasting. And actually, before we do this, let's go ahead and we have a quick little video here to show you.
Three of the most influential human beings in the history of the world all agreed on one thing. It's the most powerful natural healing solution ever. One that's been used by all cultures all over the world, and one that's virtually forgotten today. What am I talking about? Fasting. What is fasting? I can feel your eyes rolling in your head right now. I get this reaction all the time. You're going to starve people? That's your solution? No, that's not my solution. Fasting is not the same as starvation. Fasting is the controlled, voluntary abstinence of food for different reasons. You can do it for spiritual reasons. You can do it for health reasons. You can do it as a political protest. Any reason is still called fasting. It's not the same as starvation. In fact, if you look back through all of recorded human history, people have always fasted. We can start with Hippocrates, who is considered the father of modern medicine. He famously said, our food should be our medicine should be our food. But to eat when you are sick is to feed your sickness. What he's talking about is this idea that we have a fasting instinct. That is, it's something that we instinctually do. Think about when you get sick, when you have a cold, when you have a flu, whatever. The last thing you're thinking about is eating at a big buffet. It's something that naturally comes to us. Our bodies are designed to fast. They're designed to store food in times of availability and during times of scarcity to release it. And that's just what comes naturally to us. And it's not just us, but all animals have the same ability. So it's not something unnatural. It's not something that we're just trying to force on our bodies. This is something natural and good. Other people that liked fasting include Benjamin Franklin, who is world-renowned as one of the smartest men who had ever lived. What he said was very wise indeed. He said, the best of all medicines are resting and fasting. Well, that's very profound. Think about that for a second. Resting, which is freedom from stress, relaxation, and fasting, which is designed to cleanse the system, which is what it used to be called a cleanse or purification. Well, those are the two best medicines. Not drugs, not surgery. Resting and fasting. Amazing. Mahatma Gandhi also said, a genuine fast cleanses the body, mind, and soul. Jesus Christ said, Satan and his plagues may be cast out only by fasting and by prayer. So if you look at the Christian faith, you can see that there are many, many prescribed periods of fasting all throughout the year. Yes, there are going to be times where you are going to be feasting, where you're going to be celebrating, and that's balanced by these periods where you're fasting to cleanse the body, to cleanse the soul. Buddhist monks also do the same sort of thing, but they do that on a daily basis. Very typically, they'll fast from noon until sunrise the next day. So every day there's a very prolonged period of fasting. In addition to that, they also have periods through the year where they'll only have water-only fast, and that will help them cleanse themselves for the year. The Muslim faith is also very profound believers in fasting. The Prophet Muhammad said, fasting brings us to the door of his palace. Many people have heard of the holy month of Ramadan. During that period, Muslims will fast from sun up until sundown, every day for an entire month. All of these religions did not prescribe fasting to their believers because they wanted to harm them. In fact, it's something that's deeply intrinsically beneficial. And we know this from the science that there's so many benefits. Benefits for weight loss, benefits for insulin sensitivity and type 2 diabetes, for heart disease, for cancer, for liver disease, and also just to feel better, for mental clarity. There's so many amazing benefits. Everybody's always worried about fasting. They're always worried, well, can I really do it? Well, think about this for a second. Consider all these religions, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Mormons, all of these people. All of these people are fasting on a regular basis every year for their entire adult lives. So can you do it? Well, millions and millions and millions of people do it. There's no reason why you can't do it. So there's lots of people who will tell you not to fast. Who? Well, there's this guy, Ronald McDonald. He doesn't want you to fast. And this happy little mermaid, she doesn't want you to fast. They're not going to make any money, right? They need you to eat. There's profits, there's shareholders, right? In the end, you really got to ask yourself, when it comes to your health, to your well-being, who are you going to trust? Jesus Christ or Colonel Sanders?
So I don't know, how many of you have tried intermittent fasting, just out of curiosity? Okay. The main thing about intermittent fasting is we all intermittent fast, because that's what the whole idea of break fast is, that we've not, when we're sleeping. Now, there are people that wake up in the middle of the night and they sleepwalk to the refrigerator and eat, and that there is a condition, supposedly, that's, I think the condition is called low blood sugar is what I think it's called. But generally speaking, we all fast. It's just that we don't fast for very long. And so the idea of intermittent fasting is to maybe a couple days a week. There's a number of books now called the 5-2 plan, where you take 2 days a week and you gently start to extend the period of time that you're fasting. Be sure you drink plenty of water. If you wake up in the middle of the night, drink more water. Dave Asprey says you can have bulletproof coffee, which is, this is the coffee that he uses real high-quality butter and coconut MCT oil. And that's for people that get really fuzzy brain. Fasting can cause symptoms because, A, you might be having a low blood sugar episode because your body hasn't shifted back to fat metabolism, or B, you may be detoxing something. Something is coming out that you had come in at some point. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And usually in that case, I just tell people, drink more water, take a little rest, and very often it'll pass. Usually that happens to people that they're trying to do too much too fast. So it's again, like running a marathon or running any kind of race, you have to train. You have to go a little bit faster, a little bit further, a little bit at a time. And you're going to basically get your body back to kind of being flexible so that it can shift to fat burning when you need to be in fat burning, and you can still do sugar burning. The nice thing about this is it's not an excuse to eat more sugar. Interestingly enough, I think Ann would agree with me, the more you do this, the less sugar you want. Anyone have that experience that has tried? Yeah. as you get yourself better able to burn fat, the allure of sugar seems to go down because you don't need it. Now, if there's a period of time where you're not eating, your body can kick into fat burning, and your brain is working good. You're feeling good. You don't need to go get that soda pop or whatever it is that you had become addicted to in the past.
So we have outlined here some of the benefits of fasting, which you should have a Health Hunter article there that has all of these outlined in it as well. But how to intermittently fast, how to fast, because intermittent fasting is, it's not necessarily restricting the number of calories you eat, but you're restricting the window in which you eat those calories. So you're only eating about 6 to 11 hours a day, kind of like the monks he was talking about that only eat in the morning. A lot of people choose to fast in the morning and then eat in the afternoon and evening. And so what a lot of people, what this looks like is they, let's say they finish their last meal at 7 or 8 o'clock. Then they go, they fast through breakfast and they eat their first meal at noon the next day. And, in that fasting period there in the morning, that's a great time to exercise, because as you exercise, you're going to even more so burn that stored fat for energy. So you're upping your requirements for energy, and so your body's gonna have to more efficiently burn fat. And I can attest to this. I have switched from being a marathon runner where I ran on average 7 to 8 miles a day to now I do the interval training, which we'll talk about here in a second, and I fast in the morning. And I have never been faster in my times as far as running. And so performance-wise, it can make a big difference when your body is able to, burn fat for energy. And so now the way you can, if you've never fasted like this before, one way to do this, like I said, is to start by pushing back, your dinner so that you have at least a 2 to 3 hour period between your last meal and your bedtime. But then the way you can start adding it in the morning is if you typically eat breakfast at 8 o'clock, try pushing your breakfast back to 9 o'clock. Do that for a week or two and then push it back to 10 o'clock and just slowly kind of push that back. And, and the way I do it, the way it looks for me is I do it during the week, and then weekends I don't do fasting. So 5 days a week, I will eat my first meal around 11 or 12 o'clock, in the morning. And you can do coffee, you can do tea, no sweeteners in it, so no calories. Drink lots of water. But most people find, when they first start, they are a little bit hungry. But what you'll notice is you'll be able to push that time back further and further, and you'll be less and less hungry. And what you should also notice is a stabilization of your blood sugar throughout the rest of the day. So, so for me, not only eating later, fasting, do I feel better in the mornings, but the rest of the day, I'm not having the ups and downs of my blood sugar. And one of really, really important piece to this is if you do fast, make sure whatever meal you're breaking your fast with is a good quality meal. Don't fast, for 17 hours and then go to McDonald's, because you're going to actually probably put your body in a worse state than if you hadn't fasted at all. So make sure you're breaking that fast with good quality fiber, so lots of vegetables, lots of good protein salads. And good fats. Yeah, smoothies, salads. So one other thing, we have about 5 minutes left here. So a few other things we're going to talk about, a few other strategies to help your body, train your body to burn fat. This is a form of exercise called high-intensity interval training. And one thing that's really nice about this is if you are in the habit of working out, you really don't have to change much about your habits. Because basically what this is training you to do is to exercise smarter rather than exercising longer. And so you're adding certain bursts of intensity to your workout. So whatever it is you do, if you walk, if you run, if you swim, if you bike, you can do this jump roping, you can do this, I do this on the elliptical machine, you can do it whatever form of exercise you enjoy. What you do is you just add certain bursts of intensity. And so a sample is, if you did say like a 2 or 3 minute warm up, then you do 30 seconds at high intensity and then 90 seconds kind of recovery at a more normal pace. And you do anywhere from 6 to 10 repetitions of that. And you repeat those, and then a 3-minute cool down. So this shouldn't take you any more than about 20 to 25 minutes. And I personally, if I do this running, that 20 minutes, those 2 miles I'm running, I feel like I ran 6 or 8 miles, in a good way. I feel tired and I feel like I got a really good workout. But the benefits of doing this sort of training is you get a significant boost in something called human growth hormone. Over 700% studies have shown doing this only 2 to 3 days a week. You don't want to do it any more than 2 to 3 days a week. But people increase their human growth hormone by over 700%. And this is the hormone that when you hit 30, it tanks. And so this is the hormone that helps you better utilize, your calories. It helps you better build muscle mass. It helps you, exercise at a greater intensity for longer.
Quick point on that. A lot of people are worried with fasting that they're going to lose muscle mass, and there'll be doctors that will tell you you're going to lose muscle mass. But with fasting, and especially if you do this interval training, your growth hormone goes up with fasting. So it compensates so you don't lose muscle mass. So that's one of the myths of fasting. I suppose you could fast too long, but if you do it the way we're talking about here, intermittently, you're not going to lose muscle mass, even though that idea is out there. The food companies would love for you to believe that. So don't buy it.
Also, with the high-intensity interval training, there's studies that have showed you can have a reduction in visceral, abdominal, and truncal fat. So your body, that overflow of sugar that gets stored, in the viscera around your organs and in your abdomen, doing the high-intensity interval training, that's the fat your body's going to pull and it's going to burn, while you're exercising in this way. It's going to increase your aerobic-powered free fat mass. So like it's happened for me. I've been consistently doing this now for about 6 months, and my times running have never been faster. So I feel like I'm getting older, but I'm in better shape than I was even 5 years ago. There are changes in your DNA, specifically some of the genes associated with fat metabolism. So not only are you retraining your body to burn fat while you're actually exercising, but then the rest of the day, your body's going to be better at burning fat, and using fat, for energy. And it's built into our DNA to be able to do that. Improved insulin sensitivity and reduction of blood sugar. And they've shown this, in the research, with 1 or 2 sessions of high-intensity interval training, people's insulin levels went down. So, so this is, like I said, a really great way. And you can do it walking. If your normal routine is to go out and walk for 30 minutes, just increase during those 30 seconds your pace to where you want your heart rate to get up, because part of this is getting that heart rate up to, a good level for your age. And the way I tell people you can gauge that, if you've got a smart watch that will measure your heart rate, is take your age and subtract it from 180. And that's about kind of the max heart rate you want to be at, just on average, and what you'll find is in the beginning, you'll get to that heart rate walking fast, but then what you'll find is as your body becomes more adapted to this and you get more of this, aerobic power, that you're going to have that fast-paced walking, you're going to have to turn that into a jog to get your heart rate up. And eventually your body's going to adapt and you're going to have to work harder, to get your heart rate up because you're using oxygen better. So that's a good thing. So that's kind of...
We better do a wrap-up here.
Yeah, yep.
I want to thank all of you for coming. We're going to take questions here, but if anyone has to go, please do. I want to make an introduction, but I also want to say that this is not the only way to help you improve your health. And the Reardon Clinic stands as an organization that is dedicated to helping our patients discover real health. It's our Real Health Discovery Plan. And so quality sleep, hormonal balance, nutritional adequacy, stress management, these are other things that I think are important and part of this. So this is not the whole package, but it's an important piece that I think has been missed for too long. For those of you that need a little bit more structure, Dr. Mead is not here today because she just had her baby last week, right? So she's out, but we've got Dr. Physician's Assistant Michael Shaw here with us, and Michael's going to be taking over the HCG plan. Now, the HCG is another way of structuring a weight loss plan, And it hormonally balances people a little bit more while they're going through the weight loss process. And so Mike has been doing this for how many? You've been doing it for quite a while. 15 years. So if you need a structured program, if you feel like this is just a little bit much for you to do on your own, we have the HCG plan available as well. So at this point, I want to thank everyone for coming, but I want to open it up to questions.
I'm one that has to go to
You have to go.
But I want to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Which was one reason why I came. What if you are on a medication that plays with your dopamine level and tells you want sugar all the time? How do you get on an even setting with everybody else? I mean, is there something you can take? I happen to have to be on something at this time, and I know I've gone off it before, dropped 30 pounds, had energy, but what do you do to at least make it fair?
So for those watching online, the question was, what if you're on a medication, like something that stimulates dopamine that causes you to crave and want sugar?
So basically, our whole genetic system is there to help us adapt to challenges. And so whenever we have one thing, like a medication, that's shifting us in one direction, we can make counter choices that are in favor of our health, better dietary choices, better supplemental factors, getting the sleep in order. I don't think that one medicine is going to totally disrupt the program. It may slow you down, but I don't think it's going to prevent you from still enlisting these different lifestyle changes that you can make in spite of the medicine and still gain some progress.
One other point to make too is, Dr. Ron mentioned that, sleep and stress and hormones and detox play a big role in, how you either gain or lose weight. But one other thing to keep in mind is that if you think back to our ancestors, if there wasn't an access to food, that's not a good time to reproduce. And so we have mechanisms in place that when your appetite, when your metabolism is out of balance, there's a whole cascade where thyroid might downregulate, to where your body might downregulate production of certain reproductive hormones. This is why certain reproductive conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, is directly tied to, insulin resistance. And so, so not that, to downplay any of those conditions, because they are very serious. And if you're on medications, of course, we're not recommending going off that willy-nilly. But one thing to keep in mind is that as you start to balance blood sugar, adrenals tend to balance, sleep tends to improve, reproductive hormones tend to improve. There's a lot of other positive benefits downstream hormonally when you start to balance a lot of this stuff out. And so that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Back to the diet, I totally understand that you're saying don't eat processed sugar in the morning. You're also saying don't eat like a whole food, like an apple in the morning, or try to save that till after 3 o'clock, even if it's a whole food?
Yeah, so the question was, as far as eating low carb in the morning, does that include whole foods like fruits? And the answer would be yes, because if you think again back, if you're eating ancestrally, unless it's summertime, when that's an optimal time to store fat, for the winter when there wasn't an abundance of food, even really great healthy whole foods like fruits still have a lot of fructose in them. And so
if you're trying to lose weight.
If you're trying to lose weight, exactly. So it depends on the person, and it also depends on genetically how sensitive you are to insulin. And how you can tell is if, let's say you have a breakfast high in fruits, and then come 10 o'clock you're hungry. Well, that's probably a good sign that maybe genetically you're a bit more insulin resistant, and so for you that wasn't enough to sustain you, and you had a blood sugar drop. That's my story. Is I mean, even having fruit smoothies in the morning will drop my blood sugar, but fasting or having just kind of a high fat, high protein breakfast will sustain me to lunchtime. So kind of play around with yourself and see how you feel. Yeah.
After your detox program, I went on the Dietary diet, lost weight and all that. Also did a sensitivity. I'm not sensitive to lectins. Can I put some of those lectins back in there?
So the question is this woman did our detox program, which is Thanks for bringing that up. We are doing a detox program. If you want another program to kind of help jumpstart all of this, starting in April, we do a detox program which kind of walks you through, this sort of a diet in addition to supporting the liver and detoxing, any chemicals you've been exposed to. But she also went on the low lectin diet and lost 29 pounds. Now, she said she tested her foods and is not sensitive to the lectin foods. Can she put them back in? And the answer is yes. One of the best ways to test food sensitivities is to eliminate a food for a period and then reintroduce it. So, since you've had a lot of these foods out of your diet, try putting them in one at a time and see how you feel. If you see a flare-up of inflammation, like if your joints hurt, you get headaches, you have blood sugar issues, you gain weight, that's probably not a good food to keep in your diet. But if you reintroduce it and you see no changes, then that's probably something you can put back in the rotation. Any other questions?
Yes.
If you take supplements in the morning, is it better, if you start the intermittent fasting, is it better to wait to take those supplements with your first meal, or can you take them?
There are some supplements that are better on an empty stomach, some of the herbs and various things, but most of your supplements are better with food because they are food. They're derivatives of food. And plus, people that take a lot of the B vitamins and minerals and stuff on an empty stomach, it gives you kind of an upset stomach. So I would wait and take it with food for those kinds of things. But some of the herbs and things, hormones and things, you can take on an empty stomach. Well, there's a, yes, ma'am. One more.
Do you guys see intermittent fasting? Do you guys prescribe it in the clinical realm, or do you see it being used in the clinical realm?
So the question was, do we prescribe intermittent fasting or see it used in the clinical realm?
I probably would use the word I recommend intermittent fasting. Prescribing is, you prescribe medicines, but you recommend lifestyle changes. Because it's a private personal thing whether or not people want to do it, to what degree they go with it. But we certainly do recommend it, though only recently. I probably for about the last couple of years I've been talking about the 5-2 plan, which is a kind of a mild form of intermittent fasting. But I think as I've gotten to read more of Jason Flung's materials, and he's got a number of really good books and videos on this, he has convinced me that it's, because I was probably under the impression that it was somewhat dangerous. As a matter of fact, I would say if you're planning to do an extended fast, you might want to check with your doctor first, for the simple reason that the detox or other factors may play a role. But intermittent fasting, I think if you do it slowly and carefully, I think just about anyone. We all do it. We all do it when we sleep through the night. That's intermittent fasting. It's just that we're just taking it a little bit longer than what is normally culturally common in our society.
Well, especially if you're gradual with it, because if you're in an insulin-resistant state, which if any of you read the Health Hunter article this month, I talk about how in my 20s I was in a completely insulin-resistant state. I was vegetarian, so I ate a lot of carbs. And so if you had told me to skip breakfast, I would have laughed in your face because I was that person that had to eat within 5 minutes of waking up or else I'd start getting really irritable and shaky. And so it's the type of thing, if you are insulin-resistant, if you can't even conceptualize skipping any meal, that's a good sign. You probably need to work on stabilizing your blood sugar before you jump into, fasting for long periods. And, of course, it always is best done under the guidance of a provider that can walk you through the steps and answer your questions and kind of help walk you through it.
One note on Jason Flung that you saw his video. He is a nephrologist. He takes care of people on dialysis, and a large majority of those people are diabetics who have progressed to the point where nothing is working, their kidneys are failing, they've got all kinds of health problems. And conventional medicine, the idea is just keep prescribing more and more insulin. Insulin is the cause of the problem. It's not the solution. But because in conventional medicine we treat symptoms, we think that high blood sugar is the cause of this problem. It's the manifestation. It'd be like having an infection and a fever, and you treat the fever. Well, let's also treat the infection. Let's drain the abscess or take the antibiotic or whatever you need to do to treat the infection. So high blood sugar is a problem in type 2 diabetes because you have insulin resistance, and you have insulin resistance because you have too much insulin. So so directly, the final thought, and we're going to have to let you guys go. The final thought is that when you fast, you're lowering your insulin. That's what it does. Sometimes when you eat a lot of meat, the paleo diet doesn't work for everyone because sometimes it's too much protein. But when you eat meat or fat, your body can transfer that into carbohydrates, and you end up you have more insulin again. So the only tried and true way to really reduce your insulin is to fast, but to do it intelligently, like intermittent. So this way, just exactly what we're talking about. So the question, this is a perfect way to end. What do you do if you're a really bad type 2 diabetic and you don't eat and you start to get shaky? That's an example of being extremely, your metabolic engine has shifted way into sugar burning. She's extremely into sugar burning, even though she's diabetic. And so she would have to do this very gradually, and probably under supervision would be the best thing. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you. And we'll collect any of the surveys that you filled out.